we ready?
I think so.
Okay, let's go. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Metro Maryland webinar on IG skills for the 2020s. Our presenter is going to be Andrew Ysasi. Before we get started, a few little details. We'd like to ask you to mute yourself during the presentation. You don't need to have your camera on, but we would like you to use the chat feature in Zoom at the bottom of your screen to ask any questions that you may have during the presentation. I'm Carol Agioff. I'm the president of the Metro Maryland chapter. And before we get to our speaker, just a few details about us. We are based in Montgomery County, Maryland. We are a medium-sized chapter. We were founded in 1989, and we serve the Maryland suburbs primarily of Washington, D.C. Members are government workers, private sector workers, and nonprofit workers. So we have quite a mix of different types of organizations represented, but we are all connected by the RIM profession. Our website is on the screen there. You can go there for more information. And if you're interested in membership or have any questions, you can contact the email address that you see there on the screen. We'd like to give a shout out to one of our most loyal sponsors over the past years. That is Zimmerman Associates. The slide you see there is from Zimmerman. And Eyal, would you like to say a few words?
Sure. Thank you again for, sorry, I'm in the car here. Thank you so much for offering the this opportunity to give a shout out to ZAI. We've been a proud sponsor of the DC Metro chapter and Northern Virginia at the highest level for quite a few years. Zimmerman's core business is really in the records and information management and IT services, primarily servicing the federal government, but we've got some state, local, and even private businesses. We've been in operations for over 40 years. We're a large firm, more than 850 employees, and we're headquartered in Fairfax, Virginia. We follow many standards and processes that are best in class or industry best, including ISO standards, CMMI, IT services. We've got a lot of professionals who are certified in records management, including CRMs, archivists, professional management, Six Sigma for quality, IT certifications, etc. And we've got a lot of compliance with multiple regulations on HIPAA and NIST, just to name a couple. Our core businesses and core competencies are records management, business process outsourcing, libraries, program management, and IT solutions. And with regards to records management, obviously we've done a lot of work as of late, the last few years, with M1218, which now became in 1921, support many government agencies, both in the civilian and DoD. And some of the services are just listed here, from planning strategies, policies, roadmaps, to make sure that agencies and organizations are compliant with records management requirements, design and implementation of full-blown programs, to supporting smaller projects like including performing records inventories, taxonomies, file plans, and record schedule. We basically do soup to nuts And we can either bring our systems and expertise, or we can develop everything from the ground up, or we can leverage whatever the agency or the organization has and build on top of that. And so that's basically ZII. Again, looking forward to continuing our cooperation with the two chapters and expanding that even more in the years to come.
Thank you, Eyal. And now to our speaker. He has honors too many to mention. As you can see there on the screen, he's the Vice President of Advocacy for VRC. He is president of IGBOK, which is a records and information management news service, which many of you may subscribe to. He is an instructor at San Jose State University School of Information. He's worked with ARMA to develop the Information Governance Book of Knowledge. He's a former regent with the ICRM, and he's currently president-elect of the ICRM, or the Institute of Certified Records Managers. So without further ado, I turn it over to Andrew.
Excellent. Thank you for that introduction. And everyone should be able to see my screen. All right. Well, it's a pleasure to be with you folks. And you'll see here by the title that I've included some bonus content for you. However, I promise to not go over unless we've had a really good discussion and you guys want it to continue. But I gave this presentation yesterday, and there was some feedback added to it. So I'm excited to include some of the newer content. And this presentation has evolved over the past 3 or 4 years. And I'm happy to say that a lot of the elements are still true. However, it's important to note that these skills are largely my interpretation from not only my experience throughout the RIM and IG community, but also through a lot of the research and the written works that I've been a part of, and of course the associations I've been a part of. Recently with the ICRM, I've spent time on the EDC, and I've been a mentor for them for quite some time. So if there's any point anyone has any questions or wants to interject, please do so. I'm not the type of speaker where, I'm going to shush you or tell you to not speak until the end. I would much rather have a dialogue, about this and help everyone learn as we're going. I do have PDF copies of the presentation available. And as mentioned before, this presentation is being recorded. Here's a disclaimer slide. I'll skip right through, just like those wonderful end user agreements we'd like to click accept on. Also bypass this section here as well. I was already introduced. Surveys are people who come back and ask about certain things in my presentation. I did get several inquiries about, the certifications that I have. And so I put together this slide. If anyone's ever doubted that I've been a nerd my entire life, I present to you my 6th grade photo on the left, and on the right, my picture of my much slimmer self at 21 years of age, right when the Matrix came out. I've got my Neo sunglasses and those wonderful Nextel phones that I had on my hip in case I had any IT support calls, not for adoring fans, like I probably wanted at the time. But yeah, so these certifications all wrap into a lot of where I've gotten to today, whether it's projects I've worked on or responsibilities I've had with organizations. And as the Vice President of Advocacy, I came to this role through VRC, through an acquisition. I previously worked for Kent Record Management in Michigan. I was their vice president. I effectively oversaw our operation and all of our functions within the area and throughout the organization. We were acquired late 2018. I had a nice conversation with Danny Paulo, our CEO, saying, Andrew, what do you want to do? We'd love to have you. And we came up with advocacy. So I still have to pinch myself at times to think all I have to do is mentor, educate, lobby, and volunteer on behalf of the industry for VRC. So I went from having what I thought was the best job in the world to the best job in the world. So I'm very pleased to do what I do. So with that being said, if you have any questions about any of these certifications or how they apply to my career, I'd be happy to have that conversation. I'm also very open about certifications I don't have. You'll see that I don't have a certification with e-discovery, or I'm not a certified archivist. So there are parts of that IG wheel that, yes, even someone with a lot of certifications cannot have and have gaps where I rely on others to help me fill those gaps. So, and even with those certifications, there are CRMs that have been at this for a very long time that I rely on for resources and assistance too. So again, I'm always there to help you. If you have any questions, feel free to ask about certifications. Just a quick snippet of VRC, founded in '88, located in Memphis, Tennessee, 100 facilities nationwide, growing like a weed. I don't know much about our sales or operations. If you have any concerns about VRC, or if you have questions about VRC, you can contact me and I will very likely move it on to someone who knows much better than I do. But Danny, our CEO, said, Andrew, you do your thing, we'll do our thing. And just put that shirt on and have the banners and the boxes in the back. Yes, sir, no problem. I can do that for you. So the contents of the presentation, we're going to talk about specifically skills for 2020, which is in the 2020s, which is why you're here. We're going to talk about traditional skills, which I feel we should have mastered by now or really have a good handle on, new skills, and then future skills. I've got some certifications, but I think the most favorite part of the presentation I have is the resources that I like to share with you. Like you, I've been a part of a lot of presentations, whether I've conducted them or reviewed them. And there's always those URLs or links at the end. So I've kind of jazzed that up a little bit to hopefully get you excited about some of the resources that are out there. Not just the RIM and IG resources, but other resources that tie into a lot of the elements of IG. So let's jump into traditional skills. So records and information management, by now, I'm sure many of you have sat through dozens of presentations, if not scores of presentations on records and information management. So this is what you have to master from, a skills perspective in the 2020s. Auto classification, the pros and cons and big buckets are also items you should be familiar with. Audits and updates, and of course, being that route hunter, are all things that you should be familiar with and be able to confidently tackle throughout your organization. Understanding the basics of management, operational, tactical, strategic elements of an organization. Hiring and evaluating employees are items that I feel, if you're in management or if you're in an oversight role, if you're part of a committee, you should have those skills down pat. And of course, accounting, like many of us, whether you're working in a private or public sector, sometimes you got to follow that money, and we're all impacted by it. So if you want something, you've got to have a capital expense, or if you have to understand how you manage your operation, you've got your operational expenses. It's helpful to understand how to read financial statements. I know some of you in the public sector may think that's not a big deal to me, but you may be seen as a cost center, and it's important to understand how expenses are tracked within your organization. Oftentimes, as you go up the ranks, leaders are looking at reports and they're looking at data and numbers, and oftentimes the story around those don't necessarily translate through or come through. So for you to make change, sometimes long-term change, it's important to make sure that you put some context to the story, and you can't know that without knowing the data that is being used and the numbers that are being used to monitor you and track your progress. Understanding legal matters and having legal as a bullet. I realize if anyone here is an attorney on the call, having that as one bullet as a skill is certainly not doing it any justice. But as it pertains to RIM and IG, assisting with storage, retrieval, discovery, and indexing of records for matters and cases is incredibly important. Now, if you haven't been paying attention to the EDRM.net, which for those of you who know, EDRM.net is the e-discovery reference model that's hosted by the Duke University, which is probably very close to you folks in North Carolina there. They have updated their reference, and they now put the IG wheel in front of the e-discovery process, and they're now promoting that on their website. So for those of you who like to do presentations for IG, or if you're into e-discovery, definitely check that out if you haven't. And they've updated their model to not only incorporate IG, but explain why they did it. And I think it's a great addition. And for those of us who practice IG, or are in RIM and evolve to IG, sometimes without having standards and without having frameworks to go back on that are outside of ARMA, it's difficult at times sometimes to get acceptance. And that's just another very visible organization to help us with our visibility and through the e-discovery side and the legal folks. Basic technology is something we should all be familiar with. We don't have to be technologists per se. However, we have to understand the basic inputs and outputs, office applications, email systems. I'll even include cloud platforms, whether using software as a service, platform as a service, infrastructure as a service. Some of you might even be getting involved with coding and doing vulnerability assessments or helping with logging. There's a NIST Privacy Framework version 2.0 that was released in January of 2020. Many of you probably didn't hear about it. I only heard about it because I had to do research for a course I conducted. And COVID tended to take the headlines for 2020, and of course now the presidential election here in the U.S. But that framework is very helpful for privacy professionals to understand how to work with cybersecurity. And for those of you who are aware of IG, both of those domains, specifically privacy, are part of the IG wheel. And what's neat about it is there's a Venn diagram in one of the figures of that report that shows cybersecurity incidents that involve PHI or PII or sensitive company or organizational information is a great opportunity for privacy professionals, and I would add information governance professionals to work together to mitigate or respond to those types of incidents. So that's from the NIST Privacy Framework version 1.0. Audit is something that's important. It's kind of like documentation. It tends to kind of fall by the wayside. Some of you are in heavily regulated environment, but if you're in a private entity and you don't have a lot of regulation, you'll find that audit is oftentimes something that can be a distraction from operations. So it's important to make sure you've baked in some auditing functions to manage your program. And of course, we're all familiar with the principles from ARMA. If you're not, I encourage you to do a search in the internet for ARMA's The Principles of Information Governance. There's a nice little maturity model and graphic of the principles that are there for you to help measure. In fact, ARMA had a report done in 2020 of about 970 or so individuals, not including vendors and excluding some other individuals who took their survey, that did an assessment of how individuals and organizations matched up against each other by industry, by organization size, et cetera. And they're looking to redo that again in 2021 to help us all understand where we potentially live within their maturity model. And that's important too, because if you've got a supervisor or administrator who's really harping on you to make progress, and you're at a level 4 according to the maturity model, you're doing quite well. It's rare to be at level 5, which is a transformational stage, but heck yeah, being at 4 is fantastic. You can show that we are doing much better than X% of the other folks that are out there who are part of ARMA. If you're an ARMA member, that is a free report, to my knowledge, you can download and go through. So there was a mention to IG Guru, not doing a plug there, but if you're looking for copies of the report and you can't find it on ARMA's website, we've got links on IG Guru for that. And archives, I think, is also incredibly important from a traditional skills element. Physical archives and those concepts are important, but we're also seeing now that digital archives and digital preservation are topics that we have to be familiar with, and we really shouldn't ignore any further. In some ways, we have a responsibility to make sure that we are taking archival concepts when we do our RIM, when we do our records information management work. I had a nice discussion with William Lefevre, who many of you know. He was a colleague of mine on the ICRM board for a short time, and he's also a resident of Michigan here. He works for Chrysler Fiat. I did a promo with him for his upcoming ARMA International 2020 Infocom presentation. And he made an interesting point that, when you're working on records management, you operate a different way, but when you put on your archives hat, you think just a little differently. It's not dramatic, but it's a little differently. So that's another area where I think we're really going to have to make sure that as we work today in the present, that we're considering a lot of the archival, digital archival elements of the work that we're doing. Here's an example of the information lifecycle that ARMA has published recently. Yes, they use some nice colors, and you can see they've added version control in addition to some of the traditional parts of the lifecycle we see. And just as a forecast in the future, I see a fork here or an additional circle that talks about information value or information economics, and we'll touch on that later in the presentation, but that's a certain element that you can expect to see in future versions, and that's a prediction that I have. Don't ask me when, but I feel that's something that we'll be addressing in the 2020s. So some of the new skills that could be potentially coming to us this year, if they haven't already. Information privacy, of course, is one of those new skills where before COVID, I like to say there was a privacy V that occurred, where we had a lot of privacy regulations that were really starting to impact our organizations or our governments. And with COVID, everything kind of stopped and dropped down. And recently, Brazil launched their federal privacy law. And what I'm predicting with privacy is that it's going to be that super V that everyone was talking about COVID, where it's going to go right back up. And a lot of organizations are going to have to comply with regulations that are not only outside of the US, but also state regs, for example, the New York Privacy Shield and the Illinois Biometric Security Act that will, in addition to the CCPA from California, that are going to really change the way that we protect information and take in information and our reporting requirements as a result of that. Cybersecurity is another area that continues to evolve and change dramatically. Now, again, going back to the technology reference, we don't have to be cyber pros or security pros. If you certainly have that in you, go for it. But there are there's a lot of help that I think our profession can help with these folks. Is not only the reference of helping with cybersecurity incidents as it pertains to PHI, PII, and sensitive information, but with all the information that's being collected from the cyber side, we can go in and help them with log management, with project management tips and tools, or even just tracking and retention of the information that they create, so they know they have a knowledge base to be able to go back to and look at. And logs oftentimes contain a lot of really sensitive information about a system. And as people come and go through jobs, there can be a lot of data out there that could be very sensitive that an organization or entity may not be aware, could be very, I could say, troubling if it fell into the wrong hands. So especially if you're in a federal or state type of government or local government agency, it's important to make sure you've got proper retention around your logging. And risk management, whether it's forecasting and evaluating for financial risk or organizational risk associated with project types, is something that you should be familiar with. If you're familiar with the Project Management Institute, they're mostly noted for their project management professional credential, but they have a whole risk management certification education section that really focuses on risk. There's a couple movie references I can make, but if you come from the insurance business and you've been in insurance for a long time, you know that a lot of your quote unquote secrets from quantifying and in having qualitative analysis around risk management is definitely getting to the private and public sectors, and we are able to use these tools to help mitigate risk, much like you would use to prioritize from a financial standpoint IT projects and what's going to give you the biggest bang for your buck. You can apply risk management tools to help you validate or invalidate whether something is risky or not. I've mentioned project management and administration. I'm going to make a couple references here to the net present value and earned value management. And the reason I bring these up is net present value is a frequently used project management equation and methodology used to help rank IT projects or IT spend based off of the cash flow that comes out of that. It's like an ROI, but it's a little different. So when you get a calculation after you do your NPV, you can then look at the total dollars that's brought in once that implementation has been done, and you can then forecast out what the cash inflows and outflows look like. And like anything else with software, there's usually going to be a large expense on the front end, and then there's going to be maintenance that moves on afterwards and support. And what I like about the NPV is that it really helps put numbers to validate feelings. So if you have people that come to you and say, we really need to do X or we really need to do Y project, you can apply NPV to those in addition to ROI and paybacks and all that other stuff. But that helps you rank the projected dollars associated with that compared to other projects throughout your organization, even if they're not technical. To help you get an understanding. And then if you put in another element of risk management analysis to it, wow, you really got a good sense of where you're heading. And then earned value management, I found helpful in conversion projects, whether you're scanning or you're doing digital conversion. I won't ask for a show of hands of how many people worked on failed scanning projects, but sometimes those projects have to stop because of various reasons. But the earned value helps you understand the value of what was done based off of the work that was in the queue to help you come up with a value of what was created. So from a vendor standpoint, individuals may not be able to bill, unless delivery is made. However, you can go back and find out the value of what was done behind the scenes. And this is helpful for vendors, especially if you get a lot of stops in projects, to help understand what resources were already put to, what percentage of completion is done on a project, and help you make some sort of decision based off of the value that was created. So EVM is an evolving concept. It's getting better and better. There's a lot of really good tools out there for it. Effective IG policy writing is, some of you may have seen, his last name is Mr. Eisen. He's done some ARMA presentations, and he does a great job of coaching people on how to write effective policies and directives. Instead of using that must type language, he does it in a way where it's very positive and not as dismissive. I know some of you may laugh when you hear me say this, but if someone were to say, Andrew, I need you to do this or else, I'm going to probably just kind of bristle a little bit and say, well, I need a little bit more information, and I might dismiss what actually they're trying to tell me because of the tone. And he has a lot of really good insight on how to really update your policies to make them more, what I would say, modern and in some ways adult, with them still being effective, with them still getting the message across. So really good stuff from him. Cloud technology, for those of us in this space, I think this goes to, if we were used to having administrative access or access controls or power users of technology, if you're using Office 365 or using Amazon Web Services, I think it's important to not shy away from the administrative tools associated with those systems. And specifically, the AWS, Amazon Web Services, there's a lot of really good reporting and tools available there that I think that would be beneficial to us RIM and IG professionals, specifically storage, billing information, access, bandwidth, things that cost money, things that we would track if we were doing it with paper in a record center, we would want to know. So it doesn't mean you have to know coding and how to secure the cloud and all that fun stuff, but the operations of cloud technology is something that we should be familiar with. And then change and culture management. There's the Information Governance Body of Knowledge has a great chapter on change and culture management that they brought someone in when we wrote that who is certified in that area. So if you want some tips and tricks on how to do change management and culture management within your organization, I encourage you to check out the IGBOK, which is not free for ARMA members. You do have to pay for it. I believe you can get an abstract downloaded for free, but if you want the full book per se, you got to pay the price. Excuse me, there, much better. So I've got a couple of graphics here to support some of these new skills. So obviously COVID-19 is a big story here and a big problem for the world. The IAPP, or the International Association of Privacy Professionals, has this infographic, which I use here as a reference. There's the link to it there because it may be difficult to read on the screen, where you can sit down with your IG committee and have an open discussion about what privacy considerations should be considered during COVID-19. You may have seen articles out there about how our lives have changed by working remote or monitoring employees' health and those considerations. So that's a great talking point there with your groups. If you have strategy sessions or if you have lunch and learn still over video conference, I would encourage you to check that out and maybe highlight a couple that you think you can do better on. Also, ARMA has their information governance implementation model. I'd referenced the principles before, but ARMA has evolved into this new model that really is focused on a committee-based approach. And instead of going after the functions such as privacy, legal, audit, et cetera, they go into more topical elements here that individuals should be representing on the steering committee. So that's another good guide for you in regard to some of the new skills that could be used today to help you with your IG programs. Also another call out here to the competing values framework from a culture assessment standpoint. I really like the competing values framework. Here in Grand Rapids, Michigan, we have a lot of furniture manufacturers who've been around for a very long time. So their cultures have changed dramatically over the years. And there's a couple out there that have put reports out on this competing values framework. And you can see here, it's just simply 4 types of values that are very different. And in the framework's mind, if you have equal parts of all 4 of these, you've got a pretty good organization. If you're too heavy in one area, obviously it's going to create some potential vulnerabilities from a cultural standpoint, but you certainly may have some real benefits there too. Like for example, a clan, maybe you have a party every day and everything's wonderful, but there's not a whole lot of structure, there's not a whole lot of innovation, there's not a whole lot of reporting on what's actually being done. And that's a pretty out there example, but that's just an example of a clan where you're based on your values, you all communicate, you work very well, you're like a family, you all think the same way, but naturally that can create some problems. So you can even do this type of framework for different departments and then layer them on top of each other to get an overall assessment and then break down by each group to see what needs to be done differently. And there's a myriad of other assessments out there. That's just one of my favorite. So let's get into some future skills. So software development and AI, I definitely believe are going to be part of our future. When I talk about software development or AI, it doesn't necessarily, again, mean coding, but it's understanding the coding process and understanding where retention plays a role there. We have concepts in emerging tech and artificial intelligence, and it is such a thing that maybe artificial intelligence will make auto classification easier. I know some of you in our conversations have talked about the challenges with auto classification. Well, imagine if you have an individual in the room that you can't see, we'll just call him or her AI, and AI starts making decisions for you. Well, you're still going to need, in my opinion, a person, a human being who's trained to help the AI make better decisions on how things are classified. We've all been taught back in the day that if you don't have a good index, you really can't find anything. It's like the old school library without an indexing card system where you just got a bunch of books in a room. So to use AI effectively, we still need to have individuals, which may mean we need to understand how those applications and systems work. Executive leadership and mentoring I put in here simply because, without pointing fingers at anyone, a lot of us have been in the profession for a while. And, maybe it's time to think about what's next. And when I say about what's next is whether we want a different career or we're going to be retiring soon. It's really up to us to encourage people who are new to the profession, young or old, to lay out that pathway for them to succeed. So if you're not familiar with executive leadership or mentoring, I encourage you to look into that. And then blockchain is another one of those great future skills that I think that we have to be aware of. And my colleague, Dr. Pat Franks of San Jose, wrote a great white paper with other folks, sponsored by the ARMA International Education Foundation. There's a link there. She has a great report on how blockchain technology and record keeping currently work together right now. And one of the key challenges with blockchain that we as record managers are going to have is, for those of you who understand blockchain, it's an immutable dispersed network. So information can't be changed once it's on a block. And so if we go through a disposition process, we certainly have some concerns or challenges with that. Also, if within that block there's PHI or PII, or we have to apply European privacy law to information, and if that block is visible by certain users, that can also create some challenges. So, blockchain is great technology. There's a lot of really good reasons. There's reasons why cryptocurrency has gone to blockchain, especially for tracking money. But when you apply it in different areas, especially as it pertains to people's individual private information or corporate information, and you're trying to apply that information to a retention schedule, there's some challenges there. So Dr. Pat Franks really does a good job of opening the door to that. And in other future skills here, whether you're a fan of data analytics or not, I think it's something that needs to be on your radar. Understanding how to evaluate data from the past, the future, and then showing relationships between data. There's a ton of tools out there that make this a whole lot easier than it used to be in the past. Microsoft Excel, for example, has the data analysis toolkit built into it, where you can run ANOVA and t-tests right there for comparing data, or regression analysis for showing relationships between data. And without getting to a statistics discussion, there's a lot of really good information that's available to you, for the most part, tools free, that you can use your data to invalidate or validate your feelings on why we need to increase storage because of data growth, or apply retention because we have too much data out there for risk. You can use statistical tools to help you with that. It's just a basic example of how some scatter plots work and how stats work. I'm going to just use that there as a reference because I want to make sure that I get through the rest of the content of the slides here. I talked about information economics or infonomics earlier in the presentation, and this is another skill where, and bear with me, some of you may think, oh my gosh, Andrew, what are you talking about? But this is a very real thing, in that organizations that have a lot of data already are taking the data they're creating and they're finding new ways to generate revenue from that data, whether they're selling it responsibly to third parties, notice I said responsibly, or they're using that data to make better decisions about existing products or to create innovations. For example, there's an ATM producer out there that used analytics on how individuals were using their ATMs. And because of the data they collected, they changed the interface of the ATM to make transactions easier. As a result, they were able to claim that they were able to generate not only more fees for the use of the ATM, but also they were to place more ATMs for banks because of their ease of use and because of the support issues that went down. So as a result, they had more revenue. Now, it's difficult to go into our archives and our records management boxes and say, hey, I've got money for you. So that's where concepts like infonomics, and Pat Franks talks about in her book, Records Information Management, Information Economics, has methodologies and equations and best practices to be able to find value within the information that might be right under our noses. And for those of you who are having a challenge with looking at yourself as a cost center only, there are certainly some revenue opportunities available to you through Infonomics. And that's Doug Laney there. He's the author of Infonomics. So that's not a fake person there. That's Mr. Doug. So I mentioned I had bonus content for you here, and I'm just going to fly through these. Again, these are more for reference later. Again, you'll get copies of these slides, and I want to get to the resources section. But in this area here, if we had more time and we had talked about this, I take a breakdown of all the certifications out there that really tie into IG. And some of these you've heard of. For example, the IGP, which as of recent found out from Nick Inglis, and I can publicly state this because I asked him, that a new version is expected in 2021. And he put the asterisk on there saying that obviously the outcome of the InfoCon 2020 and COVID could certainly impact that, but there's going to be an alignment to the IG coursework to the ARMA resources, specifically heavily to the IGIM, or the Information Governance Implementation Model. So if you're not, if you haven't currently thought about taking the IGP, and you look at the current framework and the current resources available, and that's comfortable to you, you may want to consider taking it before they make changes. Or if you think, I really don't care about the current stuff, I'm going to wait for the new stuff, maybe hold off until 2021. And just from the vibe I got from Nick, it's probably going to be more of a Q2, Q3 thing. It might be something they announce at ARMA 2021 in Houston. Hopefully we're together by then. Of course, there's the CRM, and I'll make a note here about the CRM. If you join some of the universities that have aligned with the ICRM, you can take graduate programs and automatically pass parts 1 through 5 simply by taking their courses. And then you just got to pass part 6 and you become a CRM. So it's kind of a neat thing if you're if you're not a fan of taking multiple choice tests. Of course, there's AIM CIP, which was recently updated in 2019. There's a lot of technical workflow stuff out there, but Jesse Wilkins has done a good job of really making some really good timely updates to it. Information privacy professional. For those of you who work in the federal government, there is a specific US Fed designation for the CIPP. If you don't work in the federal government, you can get the traditional CIPP. And if you want to be in management, you can get their Certified Information Privacy Manager credential. ISACA has their CISA, which is an auditing certification. There's 100,000 CISAs out there worldwide. It's not as technical as you think. And surprisingly, there's a lot of really good record retention information in their exam. I do not have the certification. I have their Security Manager certification, but the CISA is certainly one that could be of value to you if you are involved with auditing. And of course, our friends at the Academy of Certified Archivists have their CA certification. I'm not familiar with this one as much as I am with the others. Last I heard, you had to have a graduate degree to take this. Didn't necessarily have to be in archives, and they only allow the test to be taken at certain times of the year during testing cycles. So unlike the other exams where you can become a candidate and take it in a few days, this one you might not have that option, but certainly check out their website to make sure you're familiar with that. And more recently this summer, the CIGO Association, a new association has emerged that has the Certified Information Governance Officer credential. There's 12 certifying domains that are covered. I was one of the inaugural test takers. Thankfully, I passed. It was a proctored exam that I took virtually. And the CIGO Association has a partnership now that was announced with the ICRM. If you are a CRM and you are a CIGO, your credits that you earn for the CRM are applied to the CIGO. And you can use the designation CRM/CIGO to give you that strategic and kind of C-level element. And I did take the course. The course was very good. It was conducted by Robert Smallwood, and he uses his book, but he uses other books as well. Dr. Pat Frank's Records Information Management, second edition, which was published in 2018. If I'm correct, I believe it was 2018. It could have been 2019, but I believe it was 2018. The Infonomics book, and there's a business analytics book that's also referenced too. A lot of privacy, a lot of cyber a lot of ISO stuff in there. There's no written part. It's all multiple choice. Yeah, there were some softball questions, but it definitely was very valuable. In some ways, I wish the IGP could have matured to something like this. But if you talk to Mr. Smallwood, he'll tell you one of the reasons why he went with the CIGO is because of the IGP not being updated, in his opinion, as much as it needed to be as it relates to IG, and applying a lot of the privacy and cyber stuff that's changed since the IGP came out. Of course, we got our e-discovery certification from ACEDS, which frankly, if you look at the topics that they're testing on, there's a ton of information here. It's not all just e-discovery. You got your project planning, you've got ethics, and of course it gets into data culling, budgeting. So there's a very broad exam within the ACEDS association here that unlike the CRM where you've got to take 6 exams and one of them's written, which certainly covers a lot, it seems like they're trying to put it all into one exam as it relates to e-discovery. So check them out if you're heavily involved with e-discovery or if you want to build on certain skills you have in that area. And like with anything else, if you're going to take on a new endeavor, you make sure you set a plan, make sure you have a plan for what your organization can do, and then of course make a plan for yourself as far as how you want to prepare. Now the resources. So recently, marketing, who I referenced, they did a great job of setting up my quasi studio here because of COVID, wanted me to create a tips for passing the CRM and CRA exams. And the infographic there is on the left. And, I posted this on LinkedIn and on IG Guru, and it's on the VRC Twitter feed. But I blew it up a little bit here. So it gives you these tips with a little bit of explanation as to what you can do. And you may not be aware that the ICRM now has mentors, a mentor program where they pre-qualify their mentors, and they don't just mentor on part 6 now, they mentor through parts 1 through 6. So they're including those areas that they didn't before. So a lot of credit to the ICRM leadership for evolving that mentor program. There's study groups that are out there. I know Deborah Robbins, if you haven't heard of Deb, she has a virtual study group, and I know there's folks from the ARMA Milwaukee chapter who seem to really have flocked to that and have had some really good success with that virtual study group. Also, number 9 here, create flashcards. A lot of mentees that I'm talking to right now are using apps like Quizlet, and they're even sharing access to their own Quizlet app. So unlike what I had to do in the past, which was write out my own index cards, you can use these apps now and get this information pushed to you on your mobile device. So preparing for this, in my opinion, the CRA or CRM exams has really never been easier than it is in 2020 here with the expansion of the mentor program, with the flashcards, and also with virtual testing that can be done at any time for parts 1 through 5, provided you're a candidate, of course. And then taking part 6 is something that still has to be scheduled. ARMA's IGBOK is another great resource for you to have. I've got an ARMA a little bit. I also referenced that they should have mapped their IGP to the IGBOK by now, but obviously ARMA's had their hands full at international with leadership changes and with with conferences and COVID. So hopefully the new IGBOK version 2.0 is something that's included in the IGP. I can't speak to whether it will be or not. I'm not affiliated with that. However, the IGBOK or the IGBOK itself is flush full of really good information that is very timely as it pertains to building and running your IG program. Also, I think an underused resource, ARMA, is a record and information management core competencies. And why is this important? Is like with the principles, they have maturity models based off of different roles in RIM. And what I mean by that is if you're hiring a records clerk all the way up to a records officer, there's a breakdown of what is expected to mature from level 1 to level 4 for those various areas. And I'm really simplifying what this guide provides. But if you're looking to promote yourself and say, hey, I'd like to get an increase in pay or more responsibilities, or maybe you're underpaid for what you're doing, this resource can help shine a light on that and help you with placement of individuals and help with your separation of duties and all that kind of fun stuff as it pertains to running your program. Screenshot of IG Guru, you get 1 or 2 emails a day. A lot of you remember the old RIM listserv. Peter Curlis loved the listserv. You know, if he's on this call, which I don't think he is, I wanted to go with the forum, which we still have. He really missed the listserv because he really liked just to bomb out email stories or stories through email. So we migrated the old listserv to a new platform, and he's been at it again. So if you really want to drink from the fire hose from an IG and RIM news standpoint, you know, subscribe to the IG Guru listserv. You can also access the old archive. But if you want just kind of a taste of it, that's where you subscribe to the site and you get a couple of hand-picked articles that are kind of deemed breaking news. Also, the Wired In podcast is a relatively new IG podcast. The folks over at Alt FO have done a great job of putting together this podcast. Maria she's fantastic at it. So I encourage you to check that out. You can either Google Wired In Information Governance, or you can go to the, or Yahoo, I guess, or you can go to the URL there and gain access to it. Just like with any other podcast, you can listen whenever you'd like. InfoGov World is a quarterly publication that is out there. They've got really good emerging tech and privacy stuff, a lot of really good interviews. And Teresa Schock was recently featured in IG World. So this is a free publication. You used to be able to get paper copies, but now I believe they're all digital. There's also a podcast. I'm not sure how often that's updated. Wired In seems to be certainly more active. I know the Records Room guys, Ray Davis, they still do their podcast. I don't know if it's occurring as frequent, but the hot one is, of course, the Wired In and also IG World for that magazine type view if you're looking for that. For your RIM library, here's some really good books that many of you probably recognize. I'm going to highlight these 3 here, though. Practical Artificial Intelligence by Alan Pell Sharp is fantastic. The Executive Guides to Navigating the Information Universe is by Randy Kahn, who many of you probably know. This was published in 2020, so it's very new. He's got some really good insights there. And then Mr. Eisen Rules, he's the gentleman I referenced in regard to positive policy writing. And if you like books that are about leadership, or if you like books that have records management or IG twist to them, here's a couple of his examples. Edward Snowden, whether you agree or not with Edward, doesn't really matter. In my opinion, I think there's a lot of really good information in that book and his story that we can learn from. Kevin Mitnick is a cybersecurity consultant now who did serve time in federal prison for being a bad hacker, but he's now an author and speaker. He's written The Art of Invisibility, The Art of Private, The Art of Intrusion, The Art of Deception, and his book about running from the law and how he changed his life, The Ghost and the Wires. If you want to learn about social engineering and all the things he did, that he really tricked organizations who had all kinds of technical things in place, he definitely tells you how to do it, which of course tells us how to prevent it from happening. And there's some good leadership books here as well. So that's the end of the actual presentation. I believe we are right on time. So if you need to get a hold of me, there's my email address, Twitter, LinkedIn, and of course our Vital Records control page on our LinkedIn site. You can, or on the LinkedIn site, you can connect and follow us there. But you know, I've been speaking at a lot of events lately, virtually, and it's just great to see folks at a new chapter I haven't been to and or presented to before. And I really hope that I can get out to see you folks in person in the coming months and maybe even next year. Probably not till there's a vaccine, but I really appreciate you having me out here, and we'll open it up for any questions. You're very welcome. Checking the chat here. Who should I send the PDF slides to, just so everyone knows they can ask?
Andrew, you can send them to me.
Okay.
This is Carol.
Hi, Carol.
Hi.
Thanks for putting this together.
Oh, no problem.
I will send you a copy right now.
Okay.
Andrew,
So anyone who's interested in getting a copy of Andrew's presentation, you can contact us at ARMA Metro MD. I'm sorry, Metro MD ARMA at gmail.com.
Carol, you can put that in the chat.
I will do that.
I might even be able to put the file in the chat too.
You can.
Yep. I
Look at
allowed, yeah,
that.
I allowed sharing files.
I'll do that right
Awesome.
now too. So contact Carol, or if you're still on, see if I can get to my.
Andrew, do you mind if we post that on the chapter website, or is that something you'd rather we control?
Not at all.
Not at all? Okay.
I have no problem with that at all.
Any other questions for Andrew? Okay, well, thank you very much for your presentation. I think it got our virtual chapter year off to a great start. And I'd like to thank everyone who attended. You'll be getting a short survey very soon after the webinar. And as we mentioned, we will also be, we have recorded the webinar and we'll be posting it at some point. We will send you that information when we have it.
Thank you for opening this up to other chapters as well. I appreciate it.
And thank y'all for attending.
Yeah, great attendance for 6 p.m. on Eastern time. That's wonderful.
Okay, Henry,
Yep.
I think we're done.
Thank you very much. Have a good
All right,
evening.
thanks, everybody.
Talk to you
We're
later.
in the meeting.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.
Thank you.
Hi.
welcome.
Good night, Andrew.
Good
Good
night.
night, everybody.
Good night.
Bye.